The sky had been that dull pewter grey all morning, the kind that looks like it's holding back rain but never quite lets go. Our plan had been simple enough: a 3-day backpacking trip through a stretch of old logging road in the northern Appalachians. The map showed a creek, a ridgeline, and then a cut-off that supposedly connected back to the main trail. Nothing looked complicated, but as it always goes, the forest had its own plans. By early afternoon, with mist a turn, the trail faded into nothing, and the ridgeline dropped into a broad green valley where a thin trail of smoke drifted lazily upward. That was the first sign of life we'd seen in 2 days. We hiked toward it, half curious, half grateful. The forest thinned out until we could see roofs, rusted metal, sun-bleached boards, a few satellite dishes that looked like they hadn't caught a signal in years. About a dozen small houses sat in a loose circle around what must have been an old general store. The air had a strange stillness to it, as if time had slowed or forgotten to move on. A wooden sign hung crooked from a post. "Welcome to Pineridge Settlement, Estanded, 1908. There was no date marking its end. A woman in a long denim skirt stood near a porch, staring as we approached. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just watched, silent and steady. Then, from one of the houses, a man came out holding a tin cup. His beard was wiry and grey, his clothes plain, almost old-fashioned. "You folks lost?" he asked, his tone neither welcoming nor hostile, just flat. I told him we were backpacking, that we'd gotten turned around and were hoping to find the main trail again before sundown. He nodded once and said, "Ain't much use trying to climb out after dark. You can stay near the store if you keep to yourselves." He pointed to a bare patch of dirt behind the building. No fires after sunset. There was no offer of food, no questions, no introductions, just rules. The woman was still watching us as we dropped our packs. The way she stood, hands clasped, eyes unblinking, made me uneasy. Somewhere in the distance, a hammer struck wood in slow, steady rhythm. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It echoed off the hills like a heartbeat. When we asked where we could refill our water, the man hesitated. "Use the well, not the creek," he said. "The creek don't belong to us anymore." I wanted to ask what that meant, but the way he said it left no room for curiosity. The hammering stopped. Somewhere behind the houses, a child began to hum an off-key tune that rose and fell like a chant. We filtered our water, cooked quietly, and kept glancing up from our stoves to the dim outlines of faces in windows. They weren't hiding. They wanted us to see them. Every time I looked up, someone new was watching, and as the sun sank behind the hills, every door in that strange little town closed at once. A dozen quiet clicks in unison. Then, silence. When night came to, Pineridge, it didn't come gently. It fell like a blanket of soot. There were no street lights, no lanterns in windows, not even the glow of a candle. Only our small headlamps, weak circles of light that seemed swallowed by the dark. The woods around us were utterly still, yet the air felt charged, humming with something unseen. My friend Mark muttered, "Creepiest ghost town I've ever seen," and tried to laugh, but it came out dry and thin. We'd pitched our tents near the store, as instructed, but none of us wanted to sleep. The well water had tasted metallic, faintly bitter, and the ground itself seemed uneasy, soft in patches, as though it had been recently turned. I sat outside, watching the silhouettes of the houses. No smoke from chimneys, no sound from inside, just that heavy quiet. And then, faintly, from somewhere up the hill came singing. It wasn't a tune I recognised. Slow, low, almost mournful. More than one voice, maybe half a dozen, blending together in a rhythm that rose and fell like a tide. The sound carried through the trees, so faint I couldn't tell if it was words or something older than words. Mark and I exchanged looks, and without speaking, we stood. Curiosity has undone better people than us, but it's hard to ignore when something feels that close, that human. We followed the sound up a narrow dirt lane lined with old pine. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something sharp, resin maybe, or sap burning. The singing grew louder as we crested the rise, and then we saw them. A circle of figures around a bonfire, their faces half lit and pale. Men, women, and even a few children, all holding hands. One of the older men, perhaps the same who had spoken to us earlier, lifted a wooden staff and struck it into the ground 3 times. Every voice stopped. The forest fell silent again, except for the crackle of the fire. The man looked straight at us, his face unreadable in the flickering light. "You weren't told to walk after dark," he said. It wasn't a question. The others turned toward us, a dozen faces glinting like masks. I stammered something about hearing the singing, not meaning to intrude. He nodded slowly. "We sing for the ones who went downriver," he said. "Those who don't belong here anymore." The way he said "don't belong" sent a shiver crawling up my neck. A woman in a shawl whispered something to him. He nodded again, then pointed with his staff toward the path. "Back to your camp, before the fire dies." We didn't argue. The return walk felt twice as long, and by the time we reached the store, the singing had faded. Only the woods whispered now, 1,000 tiny creaks and sighs. I zipped my tent but didn't sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard footsteps near our camp, slow, deliberate, moving between the tents. And then, softly, as if spoken just behind my ear, "You shouldn't drink from the well." I froze, didn't move. The voice was gone as quickly as it came, swallowed by the dark. Morning came grey and heavy, as though the sun itself didn't want to touch that valley. The air smelled of damp wood and old smoke, and the settlement was quiet. Too quiet for a place that supposedly still lived. No roosters, no talking, not even a cough from behind a door. Just that same eerie stillness. I unzipped the tent and found Mark already crouched by the cold firing, staring toward the houses. His face looked drawn, pale. "You hear that last night?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said. "Someone walked right past my tent, spoke to me." He nodded slowly. "Same here, except what I heard was laughing." We both turned toward the well. The wooden cover lay slightly askew, the rope uncoiled, damp. Something about it made me uneasy, so I walked over and peered down. The water shimmered faintly in the dim light, still as glass. But there was a smell, metallic, sour, and something else, something like rot buried deep. That's when I noticed it. Faint tracks in the mud, small barefoot prints circling the well, leading off toward the creek, child-sized. We debated packing up immediately, but the trail out wasn't clear, and the fog rolling off the hills was thick enough to make navigation a gamble. Against my better judgment, I decided to ask the man who'd spoken to us before. We walked through the heart of the settlement. Doors hung open now, some just a crack, some wide enough to see into dark rooms that looked abandoned for decades. Cobwebs hung like curtains. The smell of mould and dust filled the air. Yet one door, halfway down the row, was freshly painted red. Mark knocked softly. The door creaked open a few inches. Inside stood the woman we'd seen the day before, the one in the denim skirt. Her eyes looked hollow, the colour of ash. "You should have left before dawn," she said. "We're trying," I told her, "but we can't find the trail." She looked past us, scanning the tree line as if she expected someone, or something, to be there. "You won't find it until the bell rings," she said. "That's the way of it." "What bell?" Mark asked. Before she could answer, a sharp clang echoed across the valley. 1, 2, 3 strikes, each deeper and louder than the last. It came from somewhere up the ridge, where the singing had been the night before. The woman flinched. "Go now," she whispered. "If you hear them call, don't look back." We turned to leave, but as we passed the last house, a shadow moved behind one of the windows. Not a person. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs bending wrong. Just a flicker of movement, gone before I could be sure. By the time we reached our camp, the fog had thickened into a white wall, swallowing the path. The bell had stopped, but the forest seemed alive with whispers, faint as breath on glass. Somewhere out there, something was moving through the mist, circling us, closing in. We packed, in silence, moving fast, our hands clumsy with nerves. Every twig snap made us flinch. The fog was so thick, it turned the world into smudged outlines. Trees like grey bones, the creek a dark ribbon. It was hard to tell which direction was uphill anymore. My compass spun uselessly, the needle trembling as if even it didn't want to choose a side. "We follow the sound of the creek," I said finally. "Water always leads somewhere." Mark didn't argue, he just nodded, cinching his pack straps. We set off, keeping close together, calling out now and then just to break the silence. The fog muffled everything, but once, faintly, I heard something like footsteps behind us. When we stopped, they stopped. When we moved again, so did they. The creek soon came into view, a thin stream cutting through mossy rocks. We crouched to fill our bottles, but the water looked strange, almost oily, like it carried a sheen that rippled without wind. Then, floating by, a scrap of something pale. Cloth, a sleeve maybe, torn and stiff. We backed away. That's when we heard the voices again. The same chant from the night before, but closer, clearer. Men and women, moving through the fog in unison, singing those same low looping notes. The rhythm pulsed with the same 3-beat pattern as the bell. Mark grabbed my arm. "They're behind us." We scrambled up the bank, breath loud in our ears. The ground supped at our boots, slick and soft. It took a second to realise we weren't walking on soil anymore, but ash. Grey dust that shifted like powder with every step. Bones, half buried and brittle, jutted from the ground like roots. Deer? Maybe. But some were too large, some too human. Ahead, the fog thinned just enough to reveal a shape. A cabin, old and leaning, with its door hanging loose. We ran for it, dove inside and slammed the door. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of decay. A single table stood in the centre, covered with what looked like hand-carved dolls. Dozens of them, each one crude and faceless. Mark picked one up. "What the hell is this?" Before I could answer, the chanting outside grew louder. Through the cracks in the boards we could see them now, figures moving in the mist, carrying lanterns that burned with a faint greenish glow. Their faces were blank, eyes fixed ahead as if in trance. Then the bell rang again, deep and thunderous. The dolls on the table toppled one by one, as if knocked by invisible hands. The air seemed to pulse. I felt pressure in my chest, like the sound itself was alive. The door shuddered. Someone, or something, was on the other side, pushing. Mark braced against it, shouting for me to help. I grabbed a beam from the floor and wedged it under the handle. The pushing stopped. Silence again. Then, from behind us, came a whisper, low and cold. You drank from the well." We turned. In the far corner, half hidden in shadow, stood the woman from before. Her hands were clasped around something dark and wet that dripped onto the floorboards. "You should have listened," she said. Her voice cracked like splintering wood. And then, as we stared, her body began to dissolve into mist, slowly, like smoke rising from dying embers. When she vanished, the room fell deathly still. Even the chanting outside stopped, as if every sound had been swallowed at once. Only the faint hiss of wind slipped through the cracks in the boards. Mark was trembling, pale as bone. "We've got to go," he whispered. I didn't argue. I tore the beam from the door and we stumbled back into the fog. Outside, the air had changed. The greenish lantern light was gone. The houses of Pineridge stood silent again. Only now they looked worse, like ruins left decades too long in rain and wind. The red door we'd seen earlier hung by a single hinge, and beyond it was nothing but emptiness. Even the smell of smoke was gone. The world had gone hollow. We followed what we thought was the same path we'd come in on, though it wound strangely now, doubling back in ways that didn't make sense. The fog thinned enough at times for us to see the ridge above, and for a brief, trembling moment, I thought we were free. But then came that sound again, the bell, deep and slow, ringing somewhere behind us. And with every toll, the trees seemed to move. No, not the trees. Figures. Dozens of them. Shadows stepping from the fog. Faces pale and blank, walking in silent rhythm toward us. I felt the vibration through my boots, through the ground itself. Mark bolted ahead, shouting for me to follow. I did. The ridge was steeper than it looked. The air thinned. I clawed at roots and rocks, slipping, scraping my knees raw. When I looked back, I saw them. Those people, or what used to be people, standing in a half circle below, the fog swirling around their feet. The man with the staff lifted it high and struck the ground once. The sound carried like thunder. The earth gave way under me. I slid down into a narrow gully and landed hard on my shoulder. Pain shot up my arm, but I could see daylight ahead, a pale shimmer through the fog. Mark reached back, grabbed my hand, and together we pushed through. And just like that, we were out. The fog stopped at the tree line, as sharp as a wall. Behind us, nothing but forest. No valley, no settlement, no sound. The air was warm, the sun suddenly bright again. We looked at each other, too breathless to speak. Then Mark spat into the dirt and whispered, "Let's not tell anyone about this place." We didn't stop walking until we reached the highway 2 days later. My compass started working again halfway out. We told ourselves it had all been some trick of fog and fear, an old dream stitched from exhaustion. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind shifts, I swear I can still hear that low, slow bell. And I never drink from a well I didn't dig myself.